Okay, please, Plenary Panel, come on up. They are our Plenary Panel on Corporate Social Responsibility and Sustainability, moderated by Cindy Elliott, Director of Business Industry Sector and Corporate Responsibility Lead for ESRI.
Thank you, Wink. Thank you so much. Good afternoon. It's great to see everyone here in person. I was privileged, I would say, last year to be able to come in person as well, and it's great to see the room full again. And want to thank my panelists as well. We've been doing several weeks of preparation, and I hope you really find today's session interesting, but mostly inspiring in the work that you do. Before we start today, we'll all have a chance to introduce ourselves after a few minutes. But I'm Cindy Elliott. As Wink said, I'm with ESRI, or also affectionately known as ESRI. We were founded 50 years ago by Jack and Laura Dangermond. We have been in the business of digitizing our planet for that amount of time. Jack and Laura are very committed to creating a sustainable and fair world, and we'll hear a little bit more about that from other companies today. But really, the idea is that when you digitize the planet, you think of geography and land mass and water, but that digitization and that living atlas, as we refer to it, really captures how has human movement happened over time, civilizations, biodiversity change, air pollution change, traffic. And so it's just an interesting technology and data that really is helping national governments, public sector, education, science. We're really starting to see the bridge of bringing that intelligence, that geospatial intelligence, into business. Before we get started today, as I mentioned with my panelists, we've been prepping, and I wanted to kind of table set and share a few items and thoughts with you all that we'll be talking about to really prompt thinking and inspire Q&A at the end of the session. But we felt like there were two themes that we really wanted to focus on today, like why is supply chain sustainability and corporate responsibility absolutely urgent today to address that impact not only to the environment and to business economies, but to society as well. And then ultimately, how does the private sector, a big majority of us in the room today and a very large part of our global society and economy is run by private sector. And it's private sector, we believe, that will have the biggest impact to innovation, collaboration, and also building the future of the workforce that are more sustainable in their thinking. I'm going to share a couple of slides very quickly. These are made available already to USC that you can ask to have a copy of them. But these were two very quick reference points out of the dozens that we looked up. You can see through Carbon Trust and McKinsey, up to 90% of the impact that companies make is through their entire value chain. Not their direct impact, and maybe not they touch personally, but we really have to understand the full breadth of impact that private sector and business has. And this is a very popular chart. I see this several times. I think we've all seen it. I saw it on a HIGG presentation back on Earth Day. And I refer to this as the impact life cycle. That often we think about how does a company's direct impact affect society and the environment, but there's a whole lifespan that happens upstream and downstream. And often we really think about limitations, or I think a restricted mindset about what causes Scope 3 emissions. We're going to look at a little bit more of that today. But this is things like business travel, transportation upstream and downstream, the cost of goods that go into the good that you manufacture and distribute. And where you are in that lifespan, this is a slide from Supply Pilot. Where you are in that lifespan of that good and service, your upstream and downstream is very different. This is called cradle to gate. If you're the agricultural group growing the material, if you're the processing plant, or you're the ultimate brand that's selling this to your consumer, your direct and indirect are very different. And so what does that mean? This is very small, so I apologize for this, but this shows by category and type of Scope 3 the impact. And what you see in the large blue square and rectangle at the bottom, that's the cost of impact to the goods and services that you put into your product. So not even your finished good, because that would be a scope 1. But you can see through purchase goods, business travel, by industry on your far left is construction and materials, and on the far right are products and household goods and a wide range of industries. So what does this all mean? It's complicated. It's so complicated, right? Scope, tiers, whether you're the finished good, you're a component of the good, you're the raw material provider. It's incredibly complicated, and we know that, and that's one of the biggest things we can address. And again, this is another slide I poached from HIGG, but also Patagonia presented this as well on Earth Day. So these are the types of complications we know companies are facing. But it's not just about environment, it is also about the social impact. When the Accenture ebook, again, the reference for this is in the slides, they identified the top 3 global risks due to climate change. Climate change, when you're talking about drought, and someone mentioned earlier today the inability to provide air conditioning units for a population because the temperature has increased. Hurricanes, wildfires, the impact is social as well. And this study, it shows that 40% of jobs today are going to be at risk due to climate change. So how are we building that talent that's thinking about the future? But at the same time, only 47% of CEOs talk about how are they adjusting those changes and making those kind of adaptations in their businesses in order to meet like the 2030 plan and the Paris Agreement. So really staggering challenges. I found this, we've probably all seen this. Who's seen this idea of social, environmental, and economic before, this diagram? Whew. Next year, I hope a lot more people will raise their hand. It really talks about you can't address one without really looking at all 3. You have to understand the social and the environmental impacts to your economic strategies. And that these things all have to happen in coercion. They have to happen together and complementary. And I love the language here. It has to happen in an interconnected system. And that's really where we're going to jump in today, is that how are we really looking at why are not more companies doing more to actually evaluate and measure impact? How are we building effective collaborations, building the workforce, and identifying what's going to really encourage companies to take these big steps forward? And that also, we appreciate that has to happen financially as well as socially and economically. So thank you for letting me rush through that a bit today. I want to now turn the stage over to my co-panelists and let them introduce themselves, and then we'll jump into the discussion topics. I'll start with Rakhi today.
Thank you.
If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Rakhi Agarwal. I'm head of Global Supply Diversity at Sanofi, and I'm also president of Discover, a nonprofit organization that works to develop talent and break barriers for the people of color in supply chain industry. I've been in the industry for about 22 years now, and I've spent my entire career with working with organizations like Bristol-Myers Squibb, Merck, J&J, and now at Sanofi. I'm very happy and excited to be here and looking forward to a great discussion.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rakhi. Christian?
Christian Pillar, Vice President of Research and Sustainability at Project 44. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Project 44, we're the world's largest real-time supply chain visibility platform. We track 1 billion shipments across all knowledge and geographies annually. There's a bunch of other statistics we could talk about. But specific to sustainability, in my role is building out our Scope 3 emissions vision and product so that we're helping our shipper customers solve their Scope 3 problems, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Research-wise, I do research with several leading global supply chain universities on a variety of topics, mainly the fact that diesel and conventional power will probably be with us for the next 5 to 7 years, so how are we more efficient with it? Something we'll talk about. Proud of Project 44. I spent 4 years at Amazon, and then really excited to be here at USC. My wife actually graduated from USC Marshall, and she lived in the Radisson Hotel, which is now the USC Hotel. Room 314, so if you're living there, or you're staying there, that was my wife's room when she was here.
James?
Thank you, Cindy. James Schaffer, Chief Strategy Officer at HIGG. Raise your hand if you're a full-time student at this institution or a similar institution.
Full-time
Oh, there you are. I'm seeing some of these older people. I was just thinking, these are the oldest students I've ever seen. I'm really glad you've attended today. Maybe I'll just tell you a little bit about my background. One reason to see who the students are in the room, I remember way back in the olden times, also known as the early 1990s, when I was a young college student, exploring majors and potential career paths, et cetera. I came home from a break just like really energized, and over dinner, I announced to my parents that I was pretty sure I wanted to pursue a career in philosophy. And my dad, in the very typical dad kind of way, said, "Yeah, I hear there's a lot of money in that racket." It sort of quashed my dreams a little bit. But I tell that story because that tension between something that is a higher calling or mission-driven or impact or what have you, and the need to make money or maybe even use a for-profit enterprise to drive good has been a real recurring theme in my career. You may have guessed that I'm not pursuing a career in philosophy any longer. It's this tension, this dynamic is still true in my career today. I basically oversee anything growth related for HIGG. HIGG is a sustainability data and insights company that was born in the $2 trillion apparel and textile industry. So we collect primary data from factories, materials, products, et cetera. It's really hard, by the way. But we're not a nonprofit. We're trying to scale. And so my responsibility is growth, which is sort of an obfuscating word for revenue. We are really trying to grow because we think our concept and our approach to primary data has to grow or it's not working, or maybe we don't actually believe in it as a society. And so we are a private equity funded growth stage company trying to apply our techniques and our data to multiple product categories going forward. In terms of complexity, I've alluded to this, and certainly Cindy showed some interesting slides. I would say it makes philosophy look like a walk in the park. I hope everybody in this room can agree just how complicated what we're trying to do is as a collective. So this is what I do today. I've been in the sustainability space for about a decade, the broader impact sector for about 15 years. I was the managing partner of a strategy consultancy called Schaffer and Combs, and various careers before that, and management consulting and the software industry. But it's really great to be here. I just want to particularly thank Cindy for putting together this conversation.
That's great. Thank you, James, Christian, and Rakhi. So we're going to dive into a bit of our conversation today. Again, we really wanted to focus not on describing the problems that we have at hand per se, or why sustainability is so urgent. I think we all recognize that. But we seem to be, in the research that we were looking at, there seems to be a lot of interest in reporting on the interest of pursuing sustainability and less about true impact and the value and reversing impact, improving impact. And so in fact, that same Accenture study said that 72% of CEOs today ranks sustainability in supply chain as a priority, yet less than 16% of them have substantial kind of programs and projects underway. And we know that the problem isn't getting any lighter by any means. So I wanted to start with James, and we'll work our way backward on this answer. Is James, from your perspective, your history, and from your role at HIGG, what are some of the key kind of things you're trying to do and some of the challenges you're seeing?
Cindy, if that's your idea of a softball question to get us warmed up, I don't know, we might be in trouble here. Listen, I think we have to start with telling the truth, or another way to say it is defining reality. One of my favorite little business books is by the old CEO of Herman Miller, Max Dupree. He wrote Leadership is an Art, and I'm pretty sure the opening line of the book is, the first job of the leader is to define reality. And I really think it's important, if we're working on supply chain sustainability, what is the number one truth? This is really, really complicated. And so if you're running a company, contributing as a sustainability manager, maybe that's the career you'll pursue to some of the students, or maybe you're the CEO, to simplify the choice you have, you can tell 1% of the story and make your company look really great. I remember being a management consultant years ago, and I was bidding on a contract, and part of it was to go visit the campus. This is one of the brands of our lifetime, huge campus on the West Coast. And my tour guide, who was going to be the client, took me to the cafeteria. We were having lunch, and And he said 5,000 people eat here every day, and we just converted to compostable knives and forks. Like, fantastic. I mean, that's great. What are you doing about emissions in your 3,200 Tier 1 facilities? I didn't say that because I wanted to land the contract, but that's a great example of telling 1% of the story and making your company look great. There's Apparel at the other end as well. I mean, just think about some of the garments where I'll take a story from, or a reference from our home industry. Take a simple, cotton print dress and try to tell the 100% sustainability story, keeping in mind its supply chain. And I'm not even talking about post-use, just to consumer use. The cotton is sourced from a BCI farm in Pakistan, but that doesn't account for the buttons and zippers, the little bit of polyester on it. It is then shipped by you probably don't know who to get to a facility to turn that cotton into yarn in Turkey, to perhaps knit it into cotton jersey in a next door mill that employs 40,000 employees, and then dyed and washed and then cut and sewn. And then maybe it is shipped to the Port of Los Angeles by a Li and Feng contractor that is very hard to figure out exactly what company that is and what is going on that ship. And then it sits at dock for 17 days before freight on board to a contract distribution center for American Eagle, onto the retail store. That retail store gets the call from another store. They drop ship it to a consumer who needed it at the other store. Can you imagine trying to tell that 100, I'm not even touching on water or chemistry or labor. It's super complicated. So I think we as a collective working on supply chain sustainability have to start there and stop pressing for the easy answer and putting people on the hot seat because they haven't completely figured it out yet. So what is the middle path? What is the story a CEO or sustainability leadership should tell? I think it might be somewhere in the middle and a whole lot more nuanced than what we're seeing in the media and in our own industries today. I think the good news to start with is that a lot of the scientific methodology is not really being debated anymore. It's pretty easy to agree that orange liquid coming out the back door of a factory is not a good idea. The methodology behind eliminating or mitigating that is pretty much agreed. So that's great news. Announce that your company has bought into that methodology. Let's align around the best primary data collection tools, whatever they are, in your particular supply chain. Let's talk about the data itself. Let's make sure that data is extensible into our business systems. And let's work on that as an industry, shoulder by shoulder with our competitors, to make sure that that's a realistic fact. And then make sure that there are people at the table who actually understand how supply chains work. It's a little tough coming from a software perspective here. Make sure you're not only talking to software salespeople. Let's have people in the room that actually understand that chart that Cindy showed, I would say. And then garnering commitments publicly. Say, hey, I'm Adidas. I'm going to work side by side with Nike, and we're going to commit together to this type of data, this type of data collection, this form of communicating with our consumers. And then the final piece, I think, is the most important, and that is telling the truth to civil society and consumers that this is a project of incremental progress. I mean, there's an interesting analogy here. We're at the 25-year anniversary of the Toyota Prius, if you can believe that. The first generation was introduced in Japan. If you could time travel and sit in that car today, you would say, this is objectively a piece of junk. But its inventors would say, you have no idea what it took to get to this point. In supply chain sustainability, we're all that Prius right now. So I think we have to tell the truth about where we're trying to go with what we've achieved today and giving visibility to consumers and civil society instead of boiling it all down to marketing like the 1% story I told to start.
Thank you, James. Christian, how about you, from your perspective, Project 44, kind of tackling some of those big...
I'm going to have to steal that Prius analogy. That's a pretty good one. So I'm a supply chain professional by training my entire career. Why am I doing sustainability? Mainly because I think Scope 3 emissions is a supply chain optimization problem. So think about your transportation data now, your on-time performance data. Something as simple as, was the truck on time or was it not? How hard is it for you to actually get that data, right? It's really hard to make it good. It's even harder to make it better. That problem is largely solvable now. But Scope 3 emissions data, as you mentioned, you might not even know who's moving your freight from one facility to another. So how are you going to calculate the emission of a truck in Poland? Or how are you going to calculate the emissions of an ocean vessel that you don't even know anything about? The data to do this well has traditionally been inaccessible and inaccurate. Like Project 44 solved the real-time visibility, that on-time performance problem, we will solve the Scope 3 data problem, okay? We'll create a system where we'll challenge the way things have been done. For the longest time, our supply chains have been optimized in two directions. Cost, what's the cheapest way to get from A to B? And performance, what's the fastest way to get from A to B? There's been no third direction to optimize, being emissions, or what's the cleanest way to get from A to B. We will collect all that data, and I can talk a little bit later on about how, and create a system where you can do cost versus performance versus emissions, and if you choose to do least emissions routing, understand the trade-off in cost and performance. What does that mean for you? Well, that means carrier selection, supplier selection, having the data to challenge the decision that was made 10, 20 years ago about choosing a particular supplier A in region X. Now, if you have an understanding of emissions and you have a goal, you might choose supplier B in region Y. That's a journey that might take some time, but the data to do something now is there. So very similar to how HIGG is that definitive source for Scope 1 data inside the four walls of a factory. Project 44 is, you know, for between the four walls, linking all those, the links connecting those nodes. So Cindy had a great slide up about the different industries and how much Scope 1, how much Scope 3. Really important to understand where your industry is, how much Scope 1, 2, and 3 you have, and then start working with those partners that are the definitive data source for your biggest problem. There's a lot of work already being done here. There's a path to reduce emissions now. We have many customers that are doing this, multinational corporations, but there's a lot more to do. It was said several times, you know, Germany's still mining coal. I think diesel and conventional power vessels will be around with us for a while, so we have to do better about it now. Obviously, building better pallets and reducing empty miles, et cetera, that's all good, but there are other ways to optimize to do better. I think the final point I want to make on this is that there's about 42, 43,000 global container vessels. We have a vessel-level digital twin for each one. Does anyone know how many LNG-capable ships there are out of that population? Anyone want to throw out a guess? 10. It's not bad. A little bit more. It's about in the back. Oh, no, you're the same guy. Goodbye. Okay. There's about 787. So 787 LNG-capable vessels out of a population of 43,000. It will be a while before that 1% is commercially viable at scale. Same thing on road. So it's something to think about. You have to start now and get there, but alternative propulsion vessels probably aren't going to get you there as fast as you need to be.
Thanks so much, Christian. I think that was a good, really strong focus on transportation and environmental impact. And now I'll turn to Rakhi. No, you know, obviously we planned this, but Rakhi, can you approach things also from a very much a social perspective and a diversity, equity, and inclusion? And your group sits in procurement.
Yes.
Right? Do you want to describe how you're addressing some of these big challenges and looking beyond, in addition to transportation and environment, some of the roles that Sanofi is taking?
Yeah, no, thank you. So great conversation and really some really good insights here. I want to begin by saying that I'm very happy and glad that Sanofi is in that 16% of the leadership commitment, because our CEO, Paul Hudson, and our Chief Procurement Officer, Stephen, they are extremely committed to sustainability. And the way at Sanofi, we have sustainability embedded into our systems and processes, and it's very much aligned with our CSR strategy that we have for the corporation. So supplier diversity is a very key and big part of that sustainability office, and I represent that. So along with that, the way we are structured at Sanofi is we have 3 pillars. We want to care for the planet, which is where the hardcore sustainability, scope 3 emissions and other initiatives come, like waste management or like going paperless initiatives and other initiatives that fall into that category. Then the other pillar is building a responsible business. Under the responsible business, we want to make sure that we are working with suppliers who have similar KPIs and similar agenda for sustainability for their organization. We partner with EcoVadis to make sure that we are measuring their quality and the index of their sustainability program. And then we want to work with them to make sure that we are doing our part and playing our part in the right direction to kind of meet those sustainability goals. Then the third piece is the socioeconomic piece, which you referred, right? And that's where I come in as well, because at Sanofi, it's very critical and very important for us to make sure that with multi-billion euros in spend, what are we going to do with respect to saving our planet and creating an equal opportunity for the small and diverse businesses out there? How can we partner and work with them and level the playing field to give them the opportunities to come bid for the business opportunities that arrive in their domain, right? So I was brought on about a few months ago at Sanofi to actually design the strategy for the supplier diversity as part of the CSR office. And the strategy that we have designed is that I have commitment from our CEO, our CPO, to achieve $1.5 billion in diverse spend by 2025, which is a really nice goal. And we are embedding the supplier diversity strategy into our CSR strategy. We are building it into our procurement and system processes. We are building it, making it part of our infrastructure, the procurement and supply chain infrastructure, to make sure that it's not an afterthought and it is at the forefront. And sustainability and CSR is always in the focus. We want to make sure that we are doing whatever we can in terms from the procurement office, from the supply chain office, to build a network of program and initiatives that will actually create a significant positive impact in the society. So I'm very happy and glad to be able to contribute to that vision and to be able to do whatever I can to move the needle in the right direction.
That's excellent. Again, that need a top category organization such as Sanofi, right, as an industry leader, has that priority, that commitment, and the actions that follow that say it's important to do all those things together in harmony.
Yes, absolutely. Like along with 1.5 billion euros in diverse supply spend, we have net zero commitment to by 2030, and in carbon emissions reduce that by 2025. So we have tons of goals, and they're all like interlinked together, and we want to make sure that we are not just focusing on scope 3 or just on supply diversity, but looking at it from end-to-end perspective as a whole supply chain, and where can we make impact and improvements to do our piece in the society.
That's outstanding. One thing, so the next question, and we'll start on this end and move down again, relates to that or builds on that. Like all the research that we looked at that you're all involved in every day and the work that you do, no firm can do this alone, right? They cannot embark and say, we're going to do this. We've worked with several firms, and it's an ecosystem. We saw that interconnected ecosystem and network in the C model, the social, economic, and environmental. Do you want to describe, each of you describe, how is that ecosystem evolving? External stakeholders, could be competitors, could be peers, could be associations. Do you want to describe how Sanofi collaborates?
So we're doing tons in this space, and collaboration, like you said, is extremely important because we're all here today because we all want to do the right thing. And we all have ideas in our head. We're all working in silos, but what we will be successful when we come together. We talk about our issues, our challenges, and share best practices and learn from each other. And that's extremely important, and Sanofi recognizes that. So in that spirit, we are actually collaborating with quite a few organizations externally on the supply diversity piece as well as sustainability to make sure that we are learning from each other. You might have recently read in news our partnership with Mclaren Racing, which is pretty awesome, and that's to learn from one of the best in the industry on how to be more efficient in your manufacturing cycle, how to turn around quickly your manufacturing processes and systems, and how to reduce or identify the waste and take it away from the manufacturing processes, right? Which is very exciting and very amazing. Who would have thought like a pharma company and a racing company kind of partnering, right? So that's a prime example. Along with that, we are partnering with our suppliers. We are making sure that we have started an initiative called Solidarity Sourcing, where we are working with large corporations that are our suppliers to build sustainability into their KPIs as well. We are holding them accountable to make sure that they are working with suppliers that have a sustainability mindset, that recognize the importance, and then we have launched multiple initiatives internally along with partnership with our suppliers to keep doing what we need to do in terms of creating a green environment, right? There are initiatives with one of our different organizations to be more green in terms of green chemistry. Along with going paperless, as I mentioned earlier, which was a project that was designed in partnership with our top suppliers, where we, going forward, will not accept any mail, any junk mail. We have plans to completely be digital, either turn back, the mail, return it, or there are other ideas on how to address the pile of junk mail that you get. We're taking pictures, we're trying to kind of show the impact, right? That is this really important? Is this really needed? Are we being thoughtful when we are sending information or accepting information? We have to be very cognizant of how we are approaching ourselves and the information at hand, right? We are in a digital world today. COVID has taught us a lot. But all of that, there are many, many initiatives and collaborations and partnerships, like I mentioned, that is helping us achieve our goals.
Okay. Christian, at Project 44, I know you have a very broad partner ecosystem and influencers that you work with.
Yeah, extremely broad. So we'll pick on that on-time performance data again, right? On the simplest level, each shipper should just go to their carriers and get this data. It's not that easy. When we think about partners, Project 44 is connected to more than 900 telematics globally, which gives us access to check the geolocation of about 200,000 carriers globally, track 98% of the containerized freight in the world, 1 billion shipments, more than 70 plus TMS and ERP partners. Our whole job is getting the data and putting it where it needs to go. Think about the challenge of something as simple as a car that you might share with your husband or wife. Same car, same miles per gallon, but someone's going to be harder on it in acceleration or braking. Maybe you live in a city like I do in Chicago, and it's a lot of stop and go traffic. Somebody that has the same car in another city might have a lot more fuel efficient vehicle. Now apply that to the hundreds of thousands of transportation assets globally that move your products but you know nothing about. Think about an ocean vessel. It has a primary and auxiliary engine that at different sailing speeds have different emissions. Something to think about. Actual distance, how long it sits in port. All of those things matter and goes into the calculation. No company should go about doing that if their main focus is building furniture or something like that. They should focus on building furniture and partner with the people whose job it is to go to all those different data sources and provide that high fidelity data back in a way where it's consumable for a shipper to understand what's going on in their global supply chain. Get the high fidelity data, the insights and the workflows to help you measure and then reduce your Scope 3 emissions. Some of the other challenges are just, no, I think I'll save that for the later one. Yeah.
You were on a roll.
I was,
exactly.
yeah.
And James, from HIGG's perspective, I know in particular you work with thousands of constituents, kind of upstream, downstream, but also a lot of agencies, policymakers. How important is that ecosystem to the success of organizations?
We think it's extremely critical, like can't do without it. I think we all remember the phrase from some of us remember the phrase from the 2006 housing crisis, too big to fail. Well, I think that theme or something like it applies in complex supply chains, too big to tackle alone. In the apparel industry, which is a good case study, and it's our home industry, what this looked like a few years after that housing crisis was the realization by the entire industry that the era of the CSR department, focusing on knives and forks and compostable cups was not going to cut it anymore. And we actually had to come together as an industry, competitor by competitor, in a pre-competitive environment, start to agree on a few things. And there's an organization called the Sustainable Apparel Coalition that was formed. You can think of Patagonia and Walmart as sort of odd bedfellows, but they essentially founded that organization together. And over a few years, competitors working together, along with civil society, policymakers, consumers, the media even, together started to build a measurement index. I remember when it was an Excel spreadsheet, it grew up to be called the HIGG index. Long story short, we spun out the company and we are HIGG today, collecting factory data from 40,000 factories across multiple product categories. To do that is extremely difficult, and I'm not going to tell you that it's just been a rosy path all along the way. It's so hard to sit with your competitors and agree on something without feeling threatened, but it's a great success story in doing that and coming out of it with a tool set that is actually extendable across your industry and adaptable to other industries as well. I think along the way you have to agree on methodology. How do we measure cleaner chemistry? The good news is I think a lot of that methodology is done in most industries. You have to agree on where and how are we going to get the data. Our company, HIGG, plays a role in that, again, at the factory material product level. Real focus on factory data, that's where the action is, to put it that way. How you extend that data into the various business systems across different enterprises at different tiers of the value chain, how that data can be used in the civil society context to report against your science-based targets, for example, and then ultimately, how do you report that to consumers in a credible way? The other thing I would just, as a data and software company, this is really unique. I think it's a mistake to view ESG data as a land grab, as if we were all Microsoft in the late 70s looking at enterprise computing and trying to grab as much operating system market share as we could. Here, let me extend that analogy a little bit. What if back then Microsoft had discovered that all million companies that they were targeting for their operating system were actually sharing 100 computers? And those 100 computers were actually owned and operated by 5 management companies. They could have still succeeded, but it would have been a very different model than the big land grab they executed in the early 80s. That's where I think we're at in sustainability data and the platforms and the tools necessary to measure and then report on performance. We see a new announcement in Silicon Valley News a week about a new carbon platform that's raised $50 million. I think it's great, but what's not great is when those companies try to be the Swiss Army knife and we can do everything for every enterprise. It's not true. It's too complicated. I think it's more about puzzle pieces, and Cindy, to your question, we're actively seeking partnerships with other pieces of the puzzle where our data becomes more valuable and helpful to enterprise decision makers and ultimately to consumers.
Well, I think it's so important too to get the best common source versus duplicative efforts, right? Then everyone's confused if we're not really standardizing and normalizing expectations and content that's there and accessible. So I feel like that's such an important aspect of this, is really finding that source of truth or the authoritative and verifiable information and reference points. So I think that collaboration and partnership, again, I think you might have mentioned that's why we're all here, and we're all, earlier we accepted the award for digital transformation with a collection of partners, ESP, Logistics, Scannet, Fleming. That all happened here, right? We kind of got inspired here. We're trying to do that today. I want to move on, though, to a next question. We'll start with Christian this time about, all well and good. If we could all be Sanofi, could all be some of these other brands that we've talked about, Patagonia, Walmart, that can make the financial commitments. But often, going down a sustainability path, a corporate responsibility path, does require time and resources that are already constrained. Do you want to talk a little bit about the financial implications, the financial kind of mindsets companies have to put themselves in? And then after Christian, I'll go to James.
Absolutely. If anyone read a recent article from CNBC, it's talking about Amazon's emissions increased 18% year over year. Why did Amazon's emissions increase 18% year over year? Well, all of us bought more at home. So emissions are going to continue to increase if we do nothing. The challenge for changing behavior is a few things. One, there's no universally accepted cost of carbon, right? So if there's no universally accepted cost of carbon, there's no financial incentive or disincentive for doing whatever you're doing. There's no incentive to change. There's no disincentive to stop doing what you're doing that's emitting anything. It's also difficult to plug that number into a spreadsheet and come up with an ROI that defines a business case that allows you to partner with a technology company to get the better data and change your behavior. So what do we do? Well, there's emerging regulation, and there's some countries and regions of the world that are further ahead than others. But I don't know about you. I'm a supply chain professional. If I wait for the government to figure out the problem, it's going to take too long. You can do more now. You can start to fix the problem now. So one is there's no universally accepted cost of carbon. Two, there's no law saying that if you import this or if you do that or don't do that, you're charged $75 a container. If there was, people would start changing their behaviors very, very quickly, right? We get all the tax professionals in here thinking about tax mitigation, and we'd be able to optimize on cost versus performance versus emissions. I wouldn't wait for the government to say that $80 per container or 90 euros per truck or whatever it might be is what you have to do. Start now. I'm in the very fortunate position where I've talked to 100 of the most sophisticated companies in the world about their sustainability, their ESG, however you want to define it. There's a few themes I see inside of that, beyond there being no cost of carbon, so therefore like no real reason to change or it makes a challenging business case is most of them have focused on scope 1 and 2, mainly because it's what they control and they think they have a better path to solve the problem. Now, if you listen to James, all that data is super complicated and I don't know much about it, but I do believe it's difficult. But it feels easier with a factory I control than a truck I have nothing to do with in a country, 2,000 miles away. So they tell me they have this big glossy report. They tell me what they're doing. Say, okay, great, that's scope 1 and 2. What's your scope 3 emissions? And they say, well, it's about 90% of our global emissions. Okay. You have a net zero initiative by 2030, 2035, 2040. If you're only solving for 10% of your problem, how are you going to get there? Very blank stares on the other end of the screen. So I would really like people, organizations to start thinking, what's an acceptable cost of carbon to start changing? If you want my opinion, start with the ETS. It's about 85 euros per metric ton. Start there and see what happens in your supply chain and how you change decisions.
That was so smart, I don't want to follow it, but I will. I'm going to take a completely different angle and talk a little bit about consumer products brands. I was talking years ago with a senior sustainability manager in a high-profile manufacturing facility in Sri Lanka, incredibly bright guy, and he said something that I'll never forget. He said, if we're talking with one of our customers, and from where he sits, he's talking about a brand. So look inside at the label of your clothing. He might be talking about that company. If we're talking with that company about the sustainability improvements they want us to implement in this factory, and we're not talking about price in our commercial relationship at the same time, we're not having a real conversation. And so the way I'll get at this financial incentive piece is sort of a discrepancy in expenditure and reward across a complex value chain. The fact, and I think this is really tough, by the way, and it gets into some issues that are a couple hundred years old, frankly. The vast majority of sustainability improvement mandates I've seen, vast, 99%, that I've seen in a value chain are coming from the brand or retailer who is facing the consumer. And those mandates are jammed down into the supply chain to be implemented by factories who are operating at extremely slim or even negative margins and have overloaded balance sheets already. Whereas the vast majority of true groundbreaking sustainability innovations I've ever seen personally in my decade doing this work are in factories by leading edge manufacturers without having been asked to do it. So you have your first dichotomy right there that is difficult to work with. I think it's almost become a cliche to say that brands have failed to price the negative externalities of the products they're commissioning through third parties in the point of sale or on their balance sheet. That's a cliche, and it's not just the brand's fault, it's our fault too as a consuming society. Fine. But now as we move forward, as brands have a lot of upside to do sustainability improvements in their value chain at the expense of the manufacturers, by the way, they're going to claim tax incentives, consumer loyalty, price preference, et cetera, facing the consumer. I just wonder if the brands are going to be willing to share some of that upside with their key value chain partners. I was listening very carefully to the gentleman from Bank of America. I thought he made a great point. Like, yeah, negotiate great terms, that's wonderful, but make sure you keep in mind your key suppliers have to be financially sustainable as well. I think this manifests really palpably in sustainability conversations. You'd be mistaken if you think these big brands and consumer products are not going to gain a ton of upside on the backs of carbon targets. They're going to. Will they share that upside with their supply chain partners? There's not really a modality for doing that today. I personally think, and this is coming from my position at HIGG, the way you start is with primary data so that you can create a red thread that connects right to where the sustainability improvements are taking place. Very often they're happening inside a factory or in distribution and logistics. Let's start there, and then that, I think, creates a future world where we can talk about financial incentives to where the improvements are actually coming from. That's my viewpoint. Cindy.
I agree, James, and I think we talked about the factory, we talked about the transportation. This goes all the way down to the farm, and it goes all the way down to the raw material, whether that's some raw material and component, whether it's the cotton, whether it's the rubber, whether it's the water. That data is available. It just has to be curated, and it's possible to collect it, and so it's all the facets, I think, of that value chain that we talked about. I'm excited to go to our last topic today, and then we will be having our award for excellence in sustainability. But the last topic, I think, something that was really near and dear to your heart, Rakhi, about the opportunity in this space right now for the future of our workforce. Right? Where's innovation and excitement about where we're at right now come from? And do you want to talk a bit about what's that future of the workforce and supply chain for sustainability?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. So I truly believe that our future talent pipeline, the students here are future leaders in supply chain. And a lot of innovation, transformation is something that they will bring about listening to the issues, the challenges that they're getting exposed right now that we are talking about, right? I take, I'm very passionate about this because I put myself in their shoes like 25, 26 years ago when I was in school. And I think that how I wish I had this opportunity, something like this, when I was a student, right? And that would completely give me a different perspective to think about what is supply chain, what am I going to do, what is my goal, what can I do to make an impact, right? I do that, all of that. I've done that for the last 22 years of my professional career, but I've done that by the virtue of being on the job, learning as I work, facing challenges, resolving issues like all the different issues we have in supply chain. But if I had this perspective and this opportunity like 25, 26 years ago, I would have been so much more ready and so much more ahead in terms of my thoughts and my ideas. So I would encourage all the students here to really think about supply chain from your career perspective, the innovation, the transformation that you can bring. We are all here to support you, right? So feel free to reach out to us. Don't hesitate. Take the opportunity, introduce yourself, build your network, build your connections, and think about what you really want to achieve in supply chain. Why are you here, right? All these different, and climate change and sustainability is real. We live it, we breathe it, we are facing the challenges. We are seeing rains in areas where it shouldn't rain. We are seeing snow in areas where it shouldn't snow. these are all real things, right? So take the opportunity. You are the talent of future. You are our future leaders. We look up to you to see how we can help you grow and develop, and basically just kind of unleash like this tremendous wave of talent that we are kind of seeding here, right? So take the opportunity and thrive.
Christian, you want to add to that?
Yeah, most global supply chains still have a lot of manual processes. You're the first generation that's really grown up with data and technology and Alexa and Siri and whoever else it is. Start with digitizing the supply chain, right? It's very difficult to have cognitive layers and autonomous supply chains and collaborative orchestration or whatever buzzword you want to use if at the end of all that is a paper-based process. Very difficult. That technology that you build should also be able to be easily consumed, not picking on anyone in particular, but my mom and her friends are not very tech savvy. So you have to make sure that the technology you're building is useful for an aging population. There's a few problems that are emerging in supply chain that will be something to think about. I mentioned Amazon, final mile, 18% increase in emissions, right? That's all because we've grown accustomed to 2-hour and next day delivery. There will be 40 megacities with 10 million plus population by 2040. Final mile being the most expensive, difficult to optimize, dirtiest. It's going to get worse. Start thinking about how you solve that problem now. The other thing, the last piece is efficiency. I think we've all heard about the driver shortage problem in the US and what are we going to do? There's not enough drivers. If you take that there's about 1.8 million Class 8 truck drivers in the US, there's a shortage of 60,800 drivers, that's 3.4%. There's data that proves that drivers drive on average 6.5 hours a day out of available 11 hours a day. That's 6.5 hours behind the windshield. The other part of the time, they're waiting in line to be loaded or unloaded. 3.4% to 6.5 hours is just another 12 minutes. If you solve the problem of giving every single driver 12 minutes back, you'll be the next billionaire.
That sounds pretty good.
Let's figure it out together.
I'm in. You know, I think there are a million opportunities. I'm like Rakhi. I kind of wish I was, back in time in your seat thinking about my career again. I mean, I'll start by saying you can study philosophy on your own time. I think this is the philosophy of our time, figuring out how to make large enterprise sustainable and scalable at the same time. So I think in a business sense, there are a million opportunities from partnerships to data science and everything in between. You have 3 good companies on stage here. Reach out. And for everybody represented on panel, there are another 100 companies doing interesting work in supply chain sustainability. I want to end my comments, though, by double-clicking on the work that Sanofi is doing that Rakhi talked about in DE&I. I have this sort of personal thesis that there are a couple 100-year-old issues related to race and equality that are major impediments to sustainability work. I've been looking at it for 10 years. I'm not an expert on it. But if I were in grad school right now and I wanted to carve out a niche where I could have a major impact, I might write that thesis and dig into that issue. Go visit any Western brand's CSR department head office. You're going to see a lot of people who look like me. Go to where the supply chain is. People don't look like me. And there's a communication problem that's rooted in a couple 100 years of problems. I would dig into that. I think it's a major, major opportunity and a missing link in sustainability work today.
I agree. I think last year we had a Women in Diversity in Supply Chain, and they said there's evidence that the more diverse your supply chain workforce, the more diverse your enterprise workforce, the higher performing your organization is. There's evidence. So please, I want to stress that point, and I want to take it also from a private sector perspective that right now, often that hesitancy to change, that was one of the phrases I was looking for Christian to use today. Let's all encourage our leaders and our private sector organizations to rise above their hesitancy and really tackle this head on and come to organizations like this. I mentioned just I have the privilege and the honor to be on the board here with Nick's organization and the Kendrick Institute. And we talked very explicitly yesterday about change management, and the reason the Institute is so important here is that there are very few institutions like this out in the ecosystem that we all operate in. That's why we find the time and energy to be here. And I want to encourage you to go back and not only the work that you do, but inspire your peers and other organizations to come alongside. Well, we've got a few minutes still to take some questions before we wrap, and just wanted to kind of encourage people to take the mic or hold your hand up and we'll call on you and see what everybody's thinking right now. Yes, sir. I see two sirs so far. Oh, Young and the young man over here. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Young. I come from NovaWare Inc. So I have a supply chain background. I was the first cohort. And also, my background is in the apparel manufacturing industry. So I've worked with the brands, VF with HIGG as well. And I heard about the financial situations and how that trickles down affects to the supplier level as well. And from my point of view, what puzzled me in the brand's direction and all these kind of the CSG efforts is there's a disparity and the gap between who's leading the project, and you talked about the duplicacy, but like there's the efforts and technology advancements, and the suppliers are not aware of how to choose which technology they need to invest in. So if you would kind of pick an effort and where they need to put emphasis, what kind of pinnacle of technology these days would you say, apparel manufacturing perspective, you would say that you would recommend?
Were you able to hear that at all, James?
Well, so can I repeat the question to make sure I heard it?
Yeah.
So it sounds like you're asking, if you're a supplier, how do I choose which company I work with, which company I choose to sell my products to, right? You're talking about the suppliers?
So like let's say sustainability, like clean energy or clean manufacturing, or those kind of things. Let's say the VF was focusing on regenerative materials or recycled materials, but there are so many trademarked or patented technologies. But the supplier side, they don't have enough access to these technologies, and the brands or the companies or the retailers are actually demanding those technologies to be implemented or adopted by the suppliers. And I don't think they have enough resources or connections or learning areas to pick the technologies they need to invest in.
Okay.
And I think that you've probably seen the best practices in the industries and worked with the great initiatives from the brand side and the retailer side. And what would be the current trend and the pinnacle of the technologies that you would say that's worth investing?
Okay, so I think I got the question. There's so much you could possibly do in ESG and sustainability. Where do I start, right? So Cindy had a great, I'll take the, you want, okay,
Then we'll go
apologies.
James after. Yeah.
Cindy had a great slide up about all the different industries and how much scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 they have. If you're getting started, I'd start from your biggest emissions and work backwards from there and figure out its marginal abatement cost curve, right? Like what you can have the biggest impact on and what will reduce emissions. So if you're a global auto manufacturer like BMW, inherently your cars have embedded carbon because they're steel and aluminum, and then millions of people drive them for millions of years. So millions of years was wrong, wasn't it? Millions of miles.
You made your point.
Yeah, perfect. So that's the way I'd start. So somebody like an apparel manufacturer is going to work with James, where a global supply chain company that just buys and sells goods would probably work with me first.
Yeah, let me build on that. I think, first of all, I think manufacturers could and should speak with a unified voice more, because the quantum of sustainability measurement in most consumer product supply chain is still the audit, which I really hate. It's sort of the old clipboard approach, and the problem is that your average tier 1 factory has to complete like 100 different types of audits and assessments per year. It is not rocket science to use technological platforms. I work for one of them that can, regardless of which assessment you filled out, can look at that assessment and do a gap analysis and say, hey, instead of doing assessment number 37, we've got you covered. We've already pre-populated 62% of that assessment. So now you've got a lot less work to do. The challenge, though, is that I think manufacturers have to speak back to their customers and say, this is not difficult technology, let's adopt this. We're okay with all the questions you're asking, but let's not do this 58 different times. Let's use this technology that deduplicates some of the questions that we're being asked to answer. That's just a very practical piece of feedback for the supply chain.
I just wanted to add that it's very critical also to make sure that when you are choosing who you're working with or your supplier selection process, that you really understand and revamp your scorecarding, your selection process and your due diligence process to actually incorporate the sustainability aspects into it, right? You don't want to just take your, the current processes as is and kind of, give it or work with a supplier with the same old technology or same old packaging, or you have to really challenge yourself, be bold, and ask and encourage your suppliers to be bold as well, because unless you really challenge and ask them to be bold and kind of, think outside of the box, you will never, be able to push the envelope or be on the edge to keep transforming yourself and supply chain and to achieve the ESG goals, right? So it's extremely important that you relook at your selection process as well.
I think communication is what I also heard across the thread. This is back to that ecosystem, the interconnected system, that everyone's kind of on the same journey. In prep, you had talked about aligning Sanofi's goals with what you know as policy or trade practices coming down the line, and how are you bringing in the suppliers and the process design versus just throwing it at them. Yeah. I think we have time for one last quick question. Yes, sir, I see you. Okay.
Please speak loudly. It's very hard to hear up
It is
there.
very hard. There's noise in the background.
Hiya.
Ooh, good.
Better.
My name is Leon. Oh, whoa. My name is Leon. I'm one of the exceedingly lucky students in C10. First of all,
I'm sorry,
not,
can you
not loud enough?
lean closer to the microphone?
Closer? Sounds terrifying. First of all, thank you for a really interesting, really engaging talk. I have to apologize. This question's a little bit of a mouthful, so I had to jot it down. So I'll be reading off of this. If we set aside for a minute the perverseness of capitalism, or like the capitalist philosophy that would be leading to this 1% narrative that you were talking about earlier, and it may want to actively maintain this. How do you see a protocol?
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to interrupt. Can you bring this? Can you just come up
I can
here
step closer if you want.
No, can you just come up?
Come on up.
Come up straight to the stage.
We can't hear you. Come on up.
Welcome. Come on up.
Just keep
Yeah,
clear
it's
path. Yeah.
too far.
And then we'll repeat the question so the rest of the audience can hear it. Okay. Or just please come up and we'll repeat the question. Yeah. Well, I feel bad for Young that we didn't have a chance. No, it's just muffled. So go ahead. There you go.
Did you get any of it? Should I
No.
just start again?
Yes, there you go.
Hello.
Yeah.
Better?
Yes.
Cool. If we, I'm shaking. Setting aside for a minute the perverseness of, or the potential perverseness of the capitalist, narrative that would lead to that 1% narrative that you were talking about earlier, and may very well want to maintain it. How do you see a protocol for tangibly measuring environmental impact rather than just the transit emissions that could be condensed to a sufficiently small bite-sized form that consumers could use to make purchasing decisions, bearing in mind that that consumer may be looking at hundreds of these data packets within the span of a few minutes? Also, as just a really quick little ontological follow-up, the systematic complexity that is quasi-poetic, do you see it as artificial or natural, in your professional opinion? Because obviously it's a little bit of a value judgment.
I'll answer provocatively. I think a lot of supply chain complexity is a really negative result of consumer demand for low price points and the resulting brand's promiscuity in sourcing materials and manufacturing products. It results in a highly fragmented and fungible supply chain that is really hard to measure sustainability data from.
Sorry, I didn't catch the last part.
That it results in data that is really hard to measure because, one day, I'm big brand and I'm using this tier 1 and their set of tier 2 through 4. And the next day they lose the contract because I want, 4 pennies less per pair of jeans. Now I've got a completely different supply chain for this SKU of jeans. If you're a supply chain sustainability professional, that's a moving target with data all over the place. It's very, very difficult to do. What I was commenting on at the first is how did that happen? Why, in other words, why is everyone not vertically integrated? Well, I loved getting a good deal on this jacket. That's why.
Sorry.
Yeah, what James said. That was good.
No. Very good. And we're going to be available after the panel to have more conversation. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry. It's all the bright lights, I know. So I'm going to ask my panelists just to humor me for a few more minutes. We have an opportunity to recognize our award winner for excellence in sustainability. You may see an empty chair here today. Unfortunately, our recipient wasn't able to be here in person due to some personal conflict. I had a pleasure of working with Rick Ridgway and Patagonia for the last year. Rick is the recently retired VP of Environmental Affairs at Patagonia, and I refer to him now as my sustainability mentor. I've gotten a lot smarter in the last year about things like scope and the impact of supply chain, as well as we can't just create efficiencies and expect better results. We actually have to redesign and regenerate our planet to meet all the goals that we're going to have. And I'm so sorry. I apologize in advance to Patagonia for coughing during this. As I mentioned, Rick has been a mentor of mine. I was introduced to Rick through the Sustainable Apparel Coalition and HIGG Co. that I work with very closely. And Patagonia has embodied the values that we've talked about today: collaboration, innovation, making sure everyone wins, like raises all boats. And so it was my honor to nominate Patagonia for the Excellence in Sustainability Award. And I think about a lot of things. We've all loved their product, we love their values, but they've been able to achieve exactly what we've talked about today: excellence in category as an adventure brand, but they've also excellence in sustainability and corporate responsibility. One of their programs, I'm actually going to read to you the notes I took from it. How many of you are familiar with Patagonia's 1% pledge? A few, Stephanie, thank you very much for knowing about it. But in addition to all the other work they do around conservation and sustainability, they have something called the 1% for the planet. And since 1985, Patagonia has pledged 1% of all revenue to the preservation and restoration of the natural environment. But they've done this through an award of over $100 million in cash and in-kind donations to international and domestic grassroots environmental and social groups making a difference in local communities. So they very much have a global, persistent influence, impact, and commitment, a positive throughout the globe. And then the next thing they would say is, please don't go buy another jacket unless you terribly need one. It's the first marketing campaign I ever saw about don't buy our products. How many jackets do you need? But they were sorry not to be here today. They did provide a statement for us to share and to read. It says, we are honored and humbled to receive this award and are sorry they're unable to attend this in person. Patagonia's reason for being in their business is to save our home planet. Awards like this reinforce the fact that we are on the right path in fulfilling the mission statement. Much of this crucial work to save our home planet resides with our global supply chain. And I hope that we all can kind of take that to heart today. We are firmly committed to continuing to innovate our supply chain and share the knowledge we learn with others for the betterment of our home planet. Thank you again for the award and recognition. Oh, so here, I'll take the award. Thank you very much, Jean. And on behalf of our panel and Patagonia, we're happy to accept this award. Thank you. Well, panelists, thank you so much. I said we'll be here. I know we're taking a break at this point. Wink's making his way to stage. So remember, where it goes Wink, so do jokes. So thank you again, everybody. I appreciate the time and energy.
Thank you.